Hello everybody and welcome to the next video. This one is comparing organic versus conventional foods and builds on the previous video of making optimum health easy. Now, if you remember from that video, we talked about how eating organic foods is definitely going to be what drives optimum health. This video is really going to explore a little deeper as to why that is. So we're going to compare these two different types of foods. So here's where we're going to start. First of all, a lack of knowledge about anything, be it, organic foods or cars or houses or anything else, leads to the commoditization of that product. And this is because no additional value can be found in a more expensive product versus a lesser expensive product that looks just the same. And so here in the world of food, an organic apple doesn't really look any different than a conventionally raised apple. And so we don't see a value difference between those two products. And so when there's no value difference, we buy the cheaper one. And that, of course, would be a conventionally raised apple in that case. When you think about that, the information that gives us objective knowledge about a conventional food versus an organic one is not voluntarily shown to the public. You don't typically see much information being shared with you through the media or through other information sources. This is something that you have to actually go looking for to find information about what differentiates a conventional food versus an organic one. And so then again, going back to my previous statement, there's no new knowledge to distinguish the value between an organic food and a conventional food. And so we, typically buy the conventional, cheaper food. This is one of the leading drivers, I think, why people just don't buy organic and they just don't see the value. So I think what's important to understand is that organic foods have always been the standard for human beings throughout all of our existence on this planet until the proliferation of modern profit-based agriculture, or what we called in our last video the New World of Food, was put in place to drive profits and arguably to increase yields. So we have de-evolved our food. We've degraded the quality of our food. We've called it conventional. We sell it for less. And thus then we have an organic alternative, which we consider to be a premium food that costs more, and it drives profit for both industries, unfortunately, today. So let's go ahead and answer the simple question and the point of this video. What is organic? Let's define it. Once again, this is what humans have always eaten. Before farming, these would have been harvested from the wild and grew unattended by people. At that time, we didn't grow food. Food grew. We started farming about 10 to 12,000 years ago, as mentioned in a previous video, and throughout all that time, farming was always considered by today's standards as organic. Today's organic farming practices and requirements vary from country to country and place to place, but generally share some common attributes. Those common attributes can include biological pest control, as opposed to the use of synthetic pesticides. Weed control is typically handled by either weed pulling, crop rotation, tilling, and mulching rather than using chemical weed killers. Crop rotation is another characteristic. This enhances the nutritional value of the foods by rotating crops and rusting the soil. And also, organic farmers have a tendency to have diverse crops, whereas conventionally grown foods are typically grown in monocultures or monocrops, meaning there's one large crop for the entire farming area. Another common attribute is the use of natural fertilizers versus, synthetic petroleum-based fertilizers. Another attribute is they are not genetically modified. Organic foods do not contain genetically modification or lab-created foods. Organic foods are not irradiated. Food irradiation has been used to sterilize food and stop the ripening process to prolong shelf life. The problem is that it can also reduce the positive nutritional and enzymatic properties of the food, and it could also increase free radicals in the food. So again, organic foods do not get irradiated. And it goes without saying too that no synthetic food additives or chemical ripening agents are used on organic foods. So here's the bottom line. When we go back to the previous video, which was making optimum health easy, we shared in that video that eating organic is the way to go if you want optimum health. By eating organic, the bottom line is this: you have far less exposure to synthetic chemicals, from fertilizers to herbicides to pesticides, or artificial ripening agents. You get better nutritional properties and better enzymatic properties. And when you really think about it, go back to the video on optimum health versus not sick versus disease. And you will see that putting all this information together, that eating organic foods is the only choice, the only option if you want to achieve optimum health. When you think about eating non-organic foods, you are potentially exposing yourself to all kinds of synthetic chemicals, GMOs, and everything else that we've mentioned here. Getting those extra carcinogenic chemicals in our food cannot possibly contribute to optimum health. They just can't. You're going to find yourself in a state of either being not sick or in a state of disease by not eating organic. So now that we've covered at a high level what is an organic food, let's cover what is a conventional food. Conventional food and conventional farming was created to increase profit margins and arguably increase and maintain higher yields for a growing population of people that are now largely centered in cities. Synthetic pesticides are used for pest control. This gets on and in the crops that we're supposed to be eating and also gets into the soil. So it's a big problem for water pollution, and it's also a big problem for our health. Weed control is all done using synthetic weed killers. This, once again, also gets on and in the crops that we're supposed to be eating. It's a big problem for us, and once again, it's a big problem for water pollution. Instead of having a diverse farm with diverse vegetables and fruits growing, many conventional farmers produce a single crop or a monocrop. Also, crop rotation is not done nearly as often, if at all. Fertilizers are also synthetic and petroleum based. Now, conventional foods are also irradiated, chemically ripened, and any food additives that the food industry can get past the FDA are also used. Finally, to round out this list, many conventionally raised foods are genetically modified, and we're not talking about crossbreeding. We're talking about lab-created foods, created for profit and not necessarily for the health of the consumer. Now, I don't know about you, but I would much rather get my food from a natural farm or out of a kitchen, but certainly not out of a laboratory. So what does all this mean for optimum health? I'd like to break it down into two primary sections. The first one being synthetic chemicals and the next being GMOs. So let's talk about synthetic chemicals first. The synthetic chemicals used by conventional farming practices once again include fertilizers, herbicides, and pest control, to name a few. Let's be clear, none of these chemicals are good for you, despite what anybody would say, despite what any bought and paid for scientific study would say. Any chemical that are designed to kill bugs and kill weeds cannot possibly be good for human health. It's also not good for the environment. We do get exposed to varying amounts of these toxic compounds when we eat conventionally produced foods, whether we want to believe it or not. Washing your foods is not going to help, since many of these toxic pesticides and chemicals are inside of the foods that we're eating. And that's why we find them inside our bodies, in our bloodstream, even in the blood of unborn fetuses, we are finding chemicals. So some of the health hazards associated with the use of these chemicals, and this is definitely not a complete list, include hormone disruption. That's a big one because our entire bodies run on hormones. Everything from how we feel to whether or not we're hungry or not is all hormone based. It can cause cancer. It can cause nervous system damage, which can lead to behavioral health issues and depression and all the other, psychological issues that we suffer from in our society today. They're harmful to reproductive organs. They're harmful to our other organs, such as our liver and our kidneys, and the list goes on. It disrupts the immune system. It creates food allergies. I mean, think about this for a second. Whenever I was a kid, I don't remember anybody having any food allergies, and it seems to be such a common occurrence today. So food allergies is another symptom of these chemically laden, genetically modified foods. And there are probably many other ailments and problems that we have with our health in our society today that we either don't know come from these conventionally raised foods, or they have been connected but have not been admitted to. The bottom line is this: any healthy food laced with poisons and genetically modified is simply no longer a healthy food option. Now let's take a look at GMOs. Now we've already had a video on GMOs, but for the sake of covering it again to put everything into perspective, since conventionally raised foods are genetically modified, we're going to go through it again on a high level. Genetically modified foods, or GMOs, or genetically modified organisms, are foods that have had their genetic makeup altered using genetic engineering in a laboratory. Although it has several purposes, one is so the plants can withstand weed killers. Now, I don't know about you, but I have not been genetically modified to withstand weed killers, and that's why I think we have so many health problems in our society today. GMO foods have also not been fully studied for their effects on human health or the effect on the environment. And regardless, these genetically modified foods are promoted as good and healthy for everyone and everything, and it might be one of those things where, years from now we might look back and see the damage that we've done, but by that time it will be too late. For the studies that have taken place about their effects on health, some have shown to leave behind harmful materials in the body that are linked to cancer. Now, of course, these studies are suppressed and moved away from the media so that we have to actually go looking for this information. Animal studies have shown that genetically modified foods damage organs, create immune system disorders, and infertility, to name a few. GMOs were first introduced in 1996, and since that time, a percentage of the people with chronic illnesses jumped from 7 to 13%, nearly doubling within 9 years. Now, I just don't think that's a coincidence. Food allergies at that time also became suddenly commonplace, where before, again, as I mentioned before, it was a rare occurrence. Autism, digestive problems, fertility issues all increased. And once again, I mentioned it just a few minutes ago, but pesticides have been found and detected in the blood of unborn fetuses. Now, looking at this information about pesticides and GMOs, how can any of this possibly contribute to optimum health? It just can't, and that's the point. If we eat conventionally raised foods, I firmly believe that we will be in a state of either disease or in a state of not sick, but we'll never achieve optimum health by eating conventionally raised fruits and vegetables. Certain fruits and vegetables are more susceptible to absorbing toxic chemicals than others. I'd like to share with you a short list. They include bell peppers, cucumbers, tomatoes, celery, potatoes, all different kinds of grain, squash, zucchini, onions, leafy greens, kiwi, apples, peaches, strawberries, grapes, blueberries, cantaloupe, watermelon. I'm going to stop there. The list goes on and on and on. Let's just be honest with ourselves. They get into all of our foods. These are just the ones that really soak them up. So everyone, that concludes the video on organic versus conventional foods. The point that I'm trying to drive home here is that if we want to achieve optimum health, we need to lessen or eliminate our exposure to toxic pesticides, genetic modification, irradiation, and everything else that we mentioned in this video. And the only way to do that is to limit your food intake to organic food choices. And that is the bottom line. All right, we'll see you at the next video.